forum here, I think for
Sorry.
the forum here, I think those are the things that matter. I think one of the things that I always like to talk about, I guess, in my bio is that I came at this not as somebody who is a journalist necessarily, or as somebody who studied this in any kind of formal degree program, but more just because I was interested in it.
Mhm.
And I'll get into that in just a little bit. So, and also I want to thank you for rescheduling this. This was originally scheduled for late January, and I woke up with strep throat, so would have been a very miserable conversation for everybody.
That happened one time where we had a speaker who probably should have canceled, and I'm so glad that you rescheduled instead of suffering through that. So thank you.
All right, are we ready?
We are ready.
Set. All right. So before I, really begin, I think it would help to make a note on the topic of this talk, which is, about the use of social media to foment fascism. And just to avoid any confusion up front, I think it helps to have definitions. Usually when I throw around the F word, I get a lot of people telling me that I don't know what it means. So I would like to make sure we're all on the same playing field here. So when I say totalitarianism, I mean any system of power wherein all efforts, aspects, and activities are subsumed with the intention of feeding or reinforcing that power. Totalitarianism is a constant process of selection to consolidate power. Um, uh, Hannah Arendt's observation that totalitarianism destroys private life as well as public life is, I think, a really important point in understanding totalitarian logic, which is that even our thoughts ultimately must come to support the apparatus of control. It must seem very natural for the thing that you think to feel like your own thought, even though you've been conditioned to think that way. Fascism, on the other hand, is totalitarianism in a particularly emotional register. Fascism takes the binary, reductive, and simplistic framework of totalitarian logic and makes it irrational or exciting. This is why, with a lot of fascist movements, you see primal rhythms, recognizable symbols, inflammatory speeches, incredibly emotional language. It's all a very high. It's a very aesthetic form of power, which makes it much closer to something that's mythic than it is logical or analytic. I also want to point out the lack of state in my definitions, as it should be clear to any of us, especially after Citizens United, that it's quite easy to govern a population using corporate instead of state power. This is what Elizabeth Anderson calls private government. Um, for example, for most people listening, the last time someone made a decision that curtailed or expanded your freedom, your individual freedom, it was probably your employer, not your senator. Um, these distinctions between fascism and totalitarianism are important because for the majority of the country, nothing was, seriously wrong until the executive branch of the federal government adopted overtly fascist language and symbols. But this appearance of fascism is basically just a shift in register. Prior to 2016, we were already living in an increasingly totalitarian America. Trump voters were just the first group with any political muscle to actually notice and address it. And there's a lot we can learn from this kind of divergence or shift of systems, especially if we're looking to get out from under the thumb of totalitarian control altogether. So who am I? I guess a word on my background. I'm a novelist who became very interested in the way that social media was feeding into a lot of the concerns that several writers had had about photography and media generally back in the 20th century. Writers like Sontag, Berger, Debord, McLuhan, Chomsky, Adorno, writers who questioned the value in teaching enormous populations to recognize and even share images without necessarily understanding them. It's kind of an issue of image or media literacy. because this shift in my personal interest came along in 2015, I noticed how much of this treatment of images benefited Trump's candidacy and ultimately his presidency. Um, these two concerns became my book, Image Control, Social Media, Fascism, and the Dismantling of Democracy. It was my second book, came out in August of 2021. The primary project of the book is to point out that basically all activity on social media, regardless of political or ethical intent, is ultimately subverted to form, and the form is fascist. So what makes social media so dangerous? Well, it's pretty simple. Every post, whether a photo or a tweet or a block of text or video, has two components, content and form, or the image and its frame. We might not think about it, but we actually learn a lot from frames. The gold ones in museums tell us that the image is something to contemplate or revere. The short ones between TV shows or YouTube videos tell us that the image is something to want or to identify with. And the ones in newspapers tell us that this is something important to know about or be informed of. Newspapers and news programs are especially interesting because the frame itself is, at least in part, made up of advertisements. Sometimes more, especially with more sensational coverage, the news exists to make sure that we see its frame, which is the ads. Chomsky calls this the news hole. You know, we have the ads. Now let's go find some news. With traditional news, there's at least a pretense of responsibility or accountability, or even of a mission to inform and educate. Even our good friends at Fox News have to cave every once in a while to legal pressure. But with social media, there is almost no restraints on the frame because there's almost no accountability. It's actually, as we found, even dragging Mark Zuckerberg before Congress repeatedly, it's very, very hard to hold any of these people to account. And because of that, social media, which has every kind of content imaginable, the curious thing about it is the only important thing about a post on social media is that you see it. Being seen justifies the price of the ad that it appears next to. And in this way, the form not only determines the meaning of all content on social media, but starts to erase it, and the content itself comes to have no meaning at all. This simplicity makes the sole purpose both obvious and perfectly logical, which is to sell ads and generate profit, and I think everybody would say, like, well, obviously that's true. A word for this system that pursues this end with no concerns in mind, no other concerns, is totalitarian. And, capitalism, raw capitalism, is a totalitarian system. So if all content on social media as we recognize it is subsumed under a single totalitarian goal, that goal is to consolidate power in the form of money and as efficiently as possible. This relentless pursuit of profit has rendered content meaningless, but given form of social media enormous aesthetic importance. And I should say efficiency here means that, the more inflammatory or obscene or offensive the content is, the more likely it is that it will be seen. And this selection process accelerates toward highly emotional and irrational content. The real world consequences of this are obvious, I just want to say. A word for a totalitarian system that begins to present itself in an irrational, frenzied register with little regard for reality is, again, fascist. Social media as it exists today is a fascist enterprise, full stop. It subverts all activity into fascist activity by making content totally subservient to form. This is how leftists or social justice warriors, for example, allow themselves to be manipulated into becoming unpaid cops, basically, who rat people out, bully people, cancel people, et cetera, et cetera. They do it for attention or social capital, or to feel as though they belong. But it's all being manipulated by a fascist system that seeks to divide people rather than connect people. So earlier I said that Trump voters were the first people with any political muscle to notice our totalitarian predicament. Obviously, there were experts leading up to the 2016 election who noticed the fascist patterns in Trump's speeches and behaviors, but these experts lacked political muscle, another word for which is constituent power. They lacked this power because the frame that informed us of their warnings is the same frame that indicated that Trump was an exciting candidate, a loose cannon, or someone guaranteed to change the American political landscape. The same newspapers that threw us these experts had already decided that covering Trump generated more subscriptions and received more views than covering Hillary Clinton. And intentionally or not, the news media had chosen their candidate. Irrelevant of intention, social media had chosen its candidate from day one, which is the one who, by totalitarian logic, would generate the most ad revenue. Any other choice was impossible. From the point of view of a political and economic system that relies on logic and stability, this seems kind of like a stupid thing to do, to select Trump over Clinton. It's obvious who would have been a better fit to lead a government that's totally subservient to corporate interests, which we call neoliberalism. Clinton would have definitely made CEOs richer, I think. This curious phenomenon, neoliberal interests selecting a chaotic, unstable candidate, requires me to make a few notes on terrorism, on credibility, because this is all part of how this system functions. So every social contract is based on credibility. You have to believe in mutual support for mutual benefit, otherwise a power imbalance will tarnish your system. Totalitarian systems, in their inability to meet promises or improve the lives of the populace as they consolidate power, are always hemorrhaging credibility. They're all predatory, which means they're all untrustworthy. It's impossible to have credibility as a totalitarian system. In an essay about autocratic takeovers for Harper's, the writer Masha Gessen said that fear has a way of catapulting citizens into the inside of a lie. Terrorism, for any totalitarian system that is exhausting its credibility, becomes a very useful proxy power. A spectacle in the pocket or a Reichstag fire up the sleeve. In this way, it benefits certain regimes to foment extremism, both within and without militarized borders, to prevent its beleaguered citizenry that things could be worse, and that they do as a government have a mandate to rescind liberties in favor of security. The United States obviously has a long history of funding, arming, and training right-wing extremists in remote places of the world, traditionally as a way of suppressing socialist or communist influence. And this includes several of the Afghan fundamentalists who later formed Al-Qaeda. And I'm not saying, that Bush did 9/11 or whatever, but it's always worth pointing out how deeply the ruling class benefited from the curtailed liberties and defense contracts that followed a very predictable and very preventable act of violence. As a more current example, as a way of discrediting and dispersing the secular PLO and Yasser Arafat's Fatah Party, the Israeli military and intelligence apparatus provided funding and training to a fundamentalist organization that became Hamas. And every attack from Hamas serves as Israel's mandate to continue its genocide against Palestinians, who are all terrorists, all while stripping away liberties and democratic processes within Israel itself and further strengthening Netanyahu's right-wing government. As a milder example, but one closer to home, Minneapolis has a large population of unhoused people, like pretty much every American city at this point. Many of whom suffer from drug addiction and mental illness, which it shuffles around the city by destroying and dispersing encampments. This is especially a problem in the neighborhoods of the 3rd Precinct, which you may have heard about, where police and the mayor's office seem happy to punish and exhaust homeowners and business owners for having spoken out against police brutality. And basically what's going on here is that a neoliberal city government is using its most vulnerable people to terrorize residents into accepting the state's use of violence. Basically, like putting in front of people, the only option here is to push these people away. You can't help them. So where does American fascism fit into all of this? Well, for decades, an American fundamentalist right, as you probably are quite familiar with, has grown closer and closer to the seat of power. Um, Newspapers and magazines seem to have encouraged this, not only because of its entertainment value, Jon Stewart, for example, but because the spectacle of right wing politics makes neoliberal austerity seem more palatable. The function of most right wing extremist politicians in America, at least as far as the news media is concerned, is do you really want this guy to win? Do you really want this guy's law to pass? This creates a false binary between two totalitarian systems, neoliberal control or fascist control. It also guarantees that neoliberalism cannot exist without a fascist counterweight. And this ultimately means that neoliberalism protects fascism. You see this with op-ed writers in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, oh my God, defending the free speech of Nazis, transphobes, and other, right-wing people, but often condemning the free speech of protesters, the people who are actually vulnerable to these ideologies. It's legitimate if a Nazi stands up and says whatever they want to say, but it's illegitimate if a socialist lies down in front of a truck on a freeway. Both of which are considered the First Amendment. The major difference, I think, between these two regimes is that neoliberalism uses terrorism by pretending that it has nothing to do with it, whereas fascism openly governs with it. We reached a new low in this circus in 2016, where the manufactured terrorist candidate seemed so outlandishly unqualified that media organizations built story after story around his aura or mystique. We were to be fascinated, we were to be thrilled, we were to be afraid, we were to imagine how terrible life could be under such a candidate. And all of this, of course, sold subscriptions, kept eyes on TVs, and kept people scrolling. And of course, the terrorist, as we all know, won, and his presidency culminated in an overt terrorist attack on a US government building in an attempt to retain power. And this is the inevitable result of fomenting and supporting extremism, which is that you cannot control it. I've kind of come to think of Trump's election as Americans calling neoliberalism's bluff. Just enough people wanted change, even if it meant fascism. And I don't want to gloss over America's history where the ruling class has always had fascist tendencies. This is we know the history. Built by enslaved human beings upon land stolen by an indigenous population that was eradicated in the largest genocide in human history. Our founding fathers, however enlightened, were extremists in their own way and bestowed an almost religious reverence upon private property. But there is something, I think, about now that seems particularly vulnerable to fascist ideology, which seems like a very obvious thing to say given everything that we've seen. So I think a lot about, what did the Trump voter know in 2016 that we didn't, or that we didn't see? We know what fascism looks like in this country. We're meant to see it. It's meant to be very visible. But if fascism is a reaction to a different version of totalitarianism, to neoliberalism, what does that look like? And how did social media push it to such an extreme that it fractured? Because it is my belief that we're where we're at because of social media. I just want to stress that. if neoliberalism, which is a pure market philosophy, is to evaluate all conditions and make selections to consolidate profit and maximize efficiency, it requires two crucial concepts, the elimination of friction and the elimination of depth. It requires that everything be an immediately recognizable and shareable image. And this image becomes a kind of currency. A central aspect of neoliberalism is gentrification. And I mean this in a much larger kind of concept than just neighborhoods, for example. Gentrification is the replacement of what is real with what looks real. Downtown areas become suburbs that look in photographs like urban areas. Food at restaurants may taste like shit or like nothing, but it looks really beautiful on the plate and therefore looks really beautiful on photographs and therefore looks really enticing to people who aren't there in the restaurant. Movies on Netflix may be incoherent and stupid and plotless, but they certainly look beautiful. Gentrification is ultimately the replacement of real life with lifestyle, which is something to buy or sell. And what I mean by frictionlessness is the elimination of hesitation in decision making. We are trained to recognize immediately whether or not something belongs to our lifestyle. Even the way we react to or talk about art is becoming replaced with consumerist activity. Claire Dederer wrote a really, really wonderful book about this called Monsters. One of the primary functions here is to replace participation of any kind with spectatorship, to replace community with audience. We are disrelated from one another until all social and political will is subordinated to money. Even speech, which is a bedrock of democratic quality, becomes replaced with money, as we all know. Again, Citizens United, our good friend. Something, and money is only something that 1% of us have, so only 1% of us get to talk. Social media is this frictionless concept of currency metastasized. If everything becomes an image wherein content is meaningless and form is tantamount, the only thing that matters about what you say, how you look, how you present yourself, what you think, what you believe, is whether or not you circulate. And repeated exposure to this attitude, modulating one's self-perception or behavior to maximize one's value, means that before long, we accept this paradigm of valuation and measure our own self-worth as monetary. What does this cost and how do I profit become the two central questions by which we organize our lives, or even our innermost thoughts. You see this with the kind of the way that people have adopted the vocabulary of managers. I have to be more productive. I have to budget my time. I have to, et cetera, et cetera. People talk about this stuff while they're doing their laundry. Because of its irrationality and excitement, social media is the most extreme way. No, that's not what I want to say. I want to say that social media is the most extreme way in our daily lives that human beings are reduced to objects, and objects are much easier to discard than human beings. This combination of dehumanization and desperation is what makes fascism not only possible, but appealing. It's the arena in which we are being trained to discard each other. Fascism, because it is so irrational, introduces feelings of religious or spiritual intensity into the apparatus of social control. And this is, I think, a very important point, because for a population so indoctrinated into neoliberal values, the concept of an inner life, the concept of a spiritual practice becomes a luxury, sometimes even a fantasy. If all of one's time and thought is subordinated to commercial activity, If relaxing, for example, means consuming and discussing corporate products like Marvel movies or prestige TV. If friendship is replaced with affinity groups based on consumption patterns, like if gay culture becomes walking or talking about or watching or talking about RuPaul's Drag Race or logging on to Grindr for an hour before you go to bed and um, never meeting anybody. Is it really so surprising that a population with spiritual or religious inclinations feels threatened by an increasingly visible liberal ethos that says everything is fine, everyone is celebrated, everybody's happy? Um, while disrelating us from one another, neoliberalism disrelates us from our own inner lives. We are disinvited from having a relationship with our own soul or with God, whatever those words may mean for people. They're kind of a catch-all term, in my opinion. Um, Trump voters are the people who saw this enormous spiritual vacuum. Um, they saw a system of social control that denies life has meaning, that denies life is anything more than a transaction, that papers over life with an image of life. And they joined up with the first candidate who said he would destroy it. For many people, Trump brought an intensity and an excitement back into their lives. He gave them something to believe in that went beyond selling one's life 1 hour at a time to buy mediocre entertainment to make our lives less excruciating. Fascism makes explicit the way that life can be under threat. It energizes while neoliberalism anesthetizes. And in 2016, the drugs stopped working. Our system of social control reached its crisis of credibility. And the terrorist threat that it manufactured, what if this impulsive sociopath who hates the government was in control of it, was for many people, for many desperate people, a too powerful of a temptation to reject. It's no coincidence that fascism is so bound up with conspiratorial thinking. The sense that something is wrong and that no one can see it permeates fascist paranoia. And for half of the government to basically stand up there and say everything's fine, things are great, don't worry, we're all thriving, um, we're off on our way to a great future, starts to seem like the drug in A Brave New World. Because the fact is, something is very, very wrong in American society, and unfortunately, the fascist who stands up and says so is correct. His solution is a small and stupid one, which is just to change the register of power. Um, but it is a change. I don't think this lecture is exactly what any of you were expecting. I hope it alters your perspective on probably the most important problem in the world, which is how to reject the false choice between two totalitarian systems, both of which are destroying our ability to live on our planet. Fascism, as dangerous as it is just a matter of aesthetics. The real core of the problem is that the United States is at the seat of the strongest, deadliest, and longest lasting totalitarian system in the world. This is a system that has imposed itself on almost all countries on Earth with predictable and apocalyptic results. Our recent reaction against this in the form of Trump seems less like a confrontation and more like a denial. Fascism seems like America's way to cope with the enormous and nihilistic failures of neoliberal policy, including the possibility that life in only a few years will become unbearably unrecognizable, despite, that we all knew this was coming. Arendt pointed out the tyrant's creation of a false reality. What fascism promises is exactly this fictitious future. It's an exciting turn from the terrifying, obvious condition of the present. The reality of fascism is that it never works. It always ends in death because death is its politics. It doesn't cohere with real life at all. And fascism, in the idiotic form of Trumpism, is America's embrace of death. It is a way for us to assign meaning to death, and it makes death mythic. Um, Obviously, this is not desirable. So, what do we have as an alternative? One of the images that comes to me again and again in thinking of what a state can be is a sanctuary. This is in part one of the metaphors or visions that, again, the founding fathers who created this country had in mind, even if they imagined it as simply a sanctuary from taxation. Um, One of the things that I kind of find curious is that this fascist president has been obsessed with walls, with enclosing the country both literally and metaphorically. And as stupid and racist as this fantasy is, I think there is at its core an earnest desperation and why so many people are behind it, which is the idea of being enclosed in walls promises a place of rest, a place to think. Um, it is an asylum from a predatory and dangerous world. Um, Obviously, the Republican vision for this asylum has verged much closer to the other meaning of the word. And the walls recall not that of a sanctuary so much as a slum, place where it's easier to get shot by a stranger than it is to pay the bill to give birth in a hospital, and where the people on the other side of the wall drown and burn and become so desperate to get in that they'll work for nothing. This is what I mean when I refer to the idea of a secular sanctuary, um, a shield from exploitation that provides us with the space and time more than anything, to form a deeper relationship with whatever it is that gives our lives meaning. Um, a shield sounds grandiose, but it's actually quite pragmatic. We all know the list. You know, these are the conditions that make freedom possible. To you know, channel Isaiah Berlin. Um, the path to a future, a real future, um, is to let that future mean something, to let life mean something. And this has to be, I think, a core value for any secular movement. The acknowledgement that everyone has the right to an inner life, um, a right to produce and discover meaning in whatever way they choose. While it's in no way a secular responsibility to assign or cultivate meaning, there has to be a responsibility to provide the resources for people to cultivate meaning in their own lives, should they choose to. Right now, we are almost totally cut off from that possibility, um, in being worked to death, in being entertained to death, in being distracted to death. We're deprived of the resources we need to get to know our own souls, essentially. And this, I think, is the heart of religious extremism in this country. Because for the religious person, the seriously religious person, it really does feel like something has been stolen from them, which is their time to develop a healthy, honest relationship with whatever God is for them. And the threat of it does seem as terrifying and existential as for the rest of us, the loss of the planet itself. And to continue to overlook this enormous liability is only to invite more desperation and to cede more power to the fascist fantasy. And the cost of that is, the future itself. Thank you.
Okay. Um, Wholly depressing. But we're used to that on
Well,
our Friday.
let's go back to this slide. There's things we can do.
Yes. And in fact, just seeing some of the names that I recognize here, who are folks who are in attendance, we have so many champions who are fighting for those things at every level. So it does, I suppose that's where I can find the hope, right? Is like seeing all these names of people who work so hard every day in the state of Arizona, and Ian, who is in Oregon. Yes, universal basic income. There's actually a bill right now that is, oh boy, I want to say that it's made its way through our House of Representatives here in Arizona that is preemptively trying to tell the people of Arizona and any municipality that may want to attempt to, experiment with a UBI, universal basic income. Well, you can't do it. I mean, it's going to get vetoed by our governor, thank goodness. But like, it's just, when I think about too, somebody posted something on social media. There's been all these jokes about, eggs and hey, look at, I'm gonna take my kids for a walk. Like it's not even funny now. Like it's not funny. Like an embryo has more rights in this country than my daughter does, who's of childbearing age. Like I'm even surprised that they let me exist since I'm menopausal. Like, why am I even still here? Like,
Yeah, you don't
do
serve
I
you don't
I
serve a
don't
function anymore. What's the point, Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go back to some of these questions because there are some questions here.
Sure. I just want to say real quick though, kind of when you pointed out that, people are here and people are interested. That I think is the thing to chase. Um, Part of like my beef with social media is that it is basically a machine to train you to be hopeless. It is a machine to make you feel alone. It is a machine to make you feel isolated. It is a machine to make you feel overwhelmed with all the horror in the world. But all of that is being selected to show you on purpose so that you disengage and spend money on crap. That's what it's.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
taking heart that people are here, taking heart that there's people in your community, taking heart that there are people doing genuine activist work. Um, Basically, that's the antidote is community in whatever level. And I think, I mean, it's another way that we're manipulated into caring more about the presidential election than we are about our own city council people. We could actually make a change at a local level, but instead, most people are like, oh, I only care about the presidential election because that's what they've been trained to do because it's entertaining.
absolutely. And these folks who did put Trump into office the first time and then showed up again in 2020 to try to do it again,
Even more.
like I just feel like they're, like this is for them, The Apprentice Part Two, right? Like I don't feel like it's about that personality. It's so very strange to me. All right, let's see. So John, mostly this is a comment. Teenage girls experiencing massive anxiety because of comparing their appearance on Instagram. Absolutely. Andrew says, you're obviously very well educated and intellectual. Your arguments are coherent and analytical, but don't you think the foundational issue with our politics today is a complete lack of education, intellect, and a general inability for the vast majority of Americans to apply any kind of intellectual thinking to their decision making?
No, I don't. Um, if you talk to people, you find out that they're actually very smart. Um, you find out that they they are quick learners, quick studies. The problem as I see it, and I rag on social media all the time. Social media is uh, cable news on plutonium, I guess, on whatever the word might be. But um, if you if you stop indoctrinating the people into believing lies, into being scared, into you know believing that other people are actually very different from them, and we it's a term I hate, but we fall for it too. We assume that there's an unbridgeable gap between one person and another, and it's all it's been created, if that makes any sense. And I think this is very much a you know a money in politics problem, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and a money in the melding of news and entertainment being
Mm-hmm. Infotainment, yeah.
Obviously, our education system is collapsing. um, but people are more informed than they've been, I think, in a very long time. People are more literate than they've been in a very long time. People are more creative than they've been in a long time. One of the other things that I write about in my book is the explosion of creativity surrounding the image with respect to creating memes. Um, the creativity of like the average 12-year-old is just insane to like witness. Um, no, I think people are at um, a very interesting time in terms of the level of like access to information, the level of playfulness and their creativity, the way that language has accelerated so much over the last 10 years, um, is just profound to me. And it's one of those kind of, less, less horrible evil sides to social media that I find really fascinating.
Yeah.
And again, all this is, is the technology bad? No, of course not. And technology is never at fault. It's who owns the technology. You know, is it immoral to have a thing on your computer where you can like message your friends and like do calendar, shit and all that? No. Is it immoral when Mark Zuckerberg owns it? Absolutely. Um, you know, because what is it for?
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you. Like I yeah, thankfully my children are all grown up and moved out, but I know people with children and their kids to me are really, really smart.
Yeah.
As far as like when I think about, because my background actually is in education and I was a middle school and high school teacher. So we, would look at the Oh, I know there's a bunch of teachers here too, and I can't believe I can't think of it, but it's the Bloom's taxonomy. That's what it's called, right? And the way, like, one of the ways that you can tell that your kids are learning something is if they can compare it and contrast it to something else. And like the way that the kids like can compare, like this, current event is like this, and I'm like, that is brilliant.
Well, that's the root of the meme. The meme is a visual metaphor.
Exactly.
From the earliest age, people are being assailed with like millions of these every day. Um, and I finally let my Twitter account go once it, etc.
Yes.
But one of the things that I found so fascinating is that the life cycle of a meme became one day because it would evolve so quickly, change so much, and then by the end of the day, people were like, "Oh, that's over, that's done with," and then it would go to Facebook, then it would go to Instagram. Um, but Twitter for a while was like the factory. That was like where the creation actually happened. Uh,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's amazing how fast that can happen. And
Yeah,
it's
and
amazing how
yeah,
fast it can happen for evil as well.
absolutely. Also, I'm sorry, but the evangelical extremists, their meme game is so weak compared to ours. Let's just be honest about
Oh
that.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Well, and that yeah.
All right, let's see. Here is from Heather. I appreciate your objective view on our social and political spheres. The monetization of our value as people and how it's affecting our daily lives is definitely an enormous issue. Okay, so more of a comment. Ian says one of the fundamental challenges with creating a better tomorrow is it takes work, focused work, and we're all in our own ways exhausted. Oh my gosh,
Yep.
that's true.
Oh yeah, I mean the idea of being a citizen right now is kind of a joke. When are you supposed to be a citizen? We've been sold the idea, usually by the Democrats, actually, that the only thing we need to do is show up and vote. Well, that's working great, isn't it? Being a citizen means contacting your representative. Being a citizen means organizing in your community. Being a citizen means actually informing yourself on the candidates. Um, it means a lot of different things. And um, now, for the large part of the country, it just means showing up to vote. And um, that's not working very well anymore. And I
Mm-mm.
think kind of going back to the previous question, um, I think that's one of the biggest hurdles is getting people to realize that it's kind of like, vote and, don't just vote. Vote, yes, but vote and do something else. Go out in the street, block traffic, contact your senator, um, organize a, you know, actual boycott, not just a social media boycott. Um, any one of those things. Um, I am a little um, fed up with the idea of boycotts here and there because I'm not fed up. A little suspicious of the idea of boycotts because they're one more way that we are invited to think of something as a consumer. Uh,
Mm.
but on the other hand, if money is speech, withdrawing money is also speech. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Erica, who is definitely one of those activists who shows up all the time, asks, ultimately, is there any corner of the world that won't eventually be destroyed by social media in the same way? I have to seriously ask myself what country I would move to if Trump is reelected.
Um, so yeah, I think for one, uh, I think social media is over. And I don't mean that people are not on it. I don't mean that, you know, people are not going to continue to post, but the, uh, the party is over. The use of social media to create, to organically grow your reach, to network, all that stuff. Social media has turned into very, very, very small TV, I think. This is, I think, why TikTok has been the explosion that it is, and that 150 million Americans have TikTok now. Um, they don't want to connect; they want to consume, and that I think is going to ultimately get very boring very quickly. Um, TikTok for me is one of those. I find myself one of those broken clock moments with a lot of conservative politicians where they want to ban it, and I'm like, I do too, but for different reasons. But I I think that like part of the reason social media is so successful in this country is that we were primed for it. Um, TV was basically what social media was when I was growing up. Um, but B, we're the people who are worked to death and need this distraction like a drug. Um, I talk about this all the time, how, last time I was in uh, Spain and Portugal, just walking around and seeing people in their 20s sitting at a table smoking a cigarette and having like a beer. And, you know, you don't see the same um, overwhelming public presence of the phone. It's still there, obviously. And of course, in cities like Paris, yeah, London, the major like global centers, you're going to see a lot of that. But
Mhm.
I think really like it's just a matter of go where go where work is not life, you know.
Mhm.
That's really what it is. Because in America, life is work.
And what a depressing life that is when that's like,
Yeah, well, I mean, again, that Protestant ethos,
mhm.
that'll get you.
Well, yeah, I mean, like we're only here to suffer.
Yep.
Everything
Might,
awaits us in the afterlife, blah, 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 blah.
might as well make it worse.
I find there's something that I found interesting, aside from maybe Instagram. I have a stepdaughter who's 28, a son who's 27, and a daughter who is 24. And my son, for the most, like he doesn't really do social media. He loves YouTube and he watches a lot of YouTube videos. Interestingly enough, he watches a lot of political videos. My daughter, Instagram, that's like and my stepdaughter, same. Like, but they've all kind of rejected all the rest of it. Like my daughter was aware that TikTok was like becoming this massive time suck, and so she stopped. Do you see a trend where maybe Gen Z or Gen Alpha coming up is like, "Ah, we've had enough of this because we've had it our whole lives and it's just, we're
I
done."
think so. I mean, it lacks the allure when you grow up with it, you know? It doesn't seem special. It doesn't seem, yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason that boomers in particular are so vulnerable to Facebook is that there was just nothing like it, you know? Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, most people who are younger millennials, Gen Z, and younger view Facebook as basically like crowding around the radio. Like it's a very ancient technology to them at this point. And
Yeah.
and I think I don't discount the I hate to say this. Um, I'll phrase it this way: the pandemic broke a lot of illusions, I think, that people had.
Yeah.
Um, One of the biggest thing that the pandemic did is it shattered the illusion that work is important um,
Hmm.
for people. I think the post-pandemic quiet quitting, whatever, all those different movements, people realizing that they just don't want to spend the rest of their lives trying to please an employer who doesn't give a shit about them. Um, but I think too, the pandemic exposed kind of the nonsensical uh, behavior of social media. And I think for a lot of young people who basically that was their only way to socialize with their friends for 2 years,
Mhm.
um, that suddenly no longer has the allure that it once did.
Mhm. We do have a question in our Q&A. I'm confused by it, but maybe you can answer it. James is saying, I think overpopulation is a large part of the problem. Comment?
Um, that is uh, something that we are not going to be able to do anything about. I think we can talk about overpopulation once billionaires are gone. Um, you know, talk about resources. Uh,
Yeah.
I think I think that's one of those arguments that you often see, particularly in libertarian circles, uh, where I think we are meant to view the problem as people who are far worse off than we are and suffering far more than we are, rather than
Mm.
the problem which is at the top.
I completely agree with you. That's why I was kind of surprised about the question about
It's just
overpopulation.
it's a distraction, you know.
Yeah.
It's just like when the Republicans stand up and say we're wasting all this money on PBS while they're um, you know, selling a new, fighter jet every 10 seconds.
hmm So, and I want to honor your time and everybody else here. We only have a couple more minutes, but I'm curious. This is my question to you: is where are you at? You said that you're done with Twitter. We made a decision as an organization to get rid of our Twitter account too. I still have mine because I can't get, it's so hard. Like and this is it, right? Like it's an addiction.
It is.
I,
So it's a drug. I mean, somebody commented a while back about the thing about teenage girls and Instagram. Um, what I would really love to see is Congress to go after these companies the exact same way they took apart the tobacco industry. Meta has internal data that says our product is bad for children, yet we continue to market this product at children. Our product kills children. We market at children. Hello, like this is exactly what happened to the tobacco companies. Um, I would really love that to be. I'm not doing like a commercial here for cigarettes, by the way. But I find it so fascinating that that was the one campaign in US history where we changed behavior. We held corporations to account. We changed laws. It can be done, you know. It just unnerves me that that's the one thing that people were okay going after, and all this other shit, including Instagram, including Facebook, including Twitter. It's just, well, I mean, freedom of speech to let the companies do what they want to do, you know?
yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
All right. Well, first of all, this is a
Um,
very,
and
like, go
answer your
ahead.
question, by the way, I'm currently on Instagram.
Well, you know what though? Insta
I'm also trying that new Blue Sky, but it's basically just a copy of Twitter, and I don't find it very enticing to basically want to recreate what Twitter was. I think Twitter's over and we should celebrate that it's over.
And the thing is, like, also with because I'm on Blue Sky and Threads as well, but like all of my favorite people aren't there. So like I don't know how to do those. It's so stupid. And of course, with my job, like kind of like we kind of need it. And also we talk about this all the time. Lindsay, who's here facilitating this whole thing, she hates Facebook, but she needs to have one to be able to connect it to our, official secular AZ Facebook. And it's just
Right,
one, she's like, don't remind me because it's
right.
horrible. And right now, we can't even stream on Facebook because they changed something and it's a problem, blah, 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 whatever. But like, yeah, it's definitely, yeah, I just hope that this generation, because they seem to be pretty smart. I hear what people are saying. We know that they're not reading as much and all these other things. And here in Arizona, boy, oh boy, are we certainly trying to destroy public education altogether. But I do think that this generation is smart. And I
Yeah.
do have hope in them.
I think
And yeah, go
the
ahead.
the thing that I think is the most dangerous risk for people who are younger is this idea of letting 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 the people who live in the who live in your phone, letting the people who live in your phone, letting the people who live in your computer um, influence what you think. It's one thing to influence what you say, but it's a totally different thing to influence what you think. And I think that once people become afraid or ashamed to think certain things, that's when you really get into totalitarian control. uh,
Mhm,
Convincing people that um, the thoughts that they're having are their own when they've been put there by something else.
mhm.
And that's the thing about young people that I actually worry about the most.
Okay. So typically on these Fridays, because here we all are trying to, gear up for the weekend and hopefully have some actual real life fun that doesn't involve screens at all. In fact, I'll go ahead and say that tomorrow we will be at the Melrose Street Fair and 7th Street. So, or 7th Avenue, I'm sorry, if you'd like to come down and see us. But one thing I always ask for our guests is despite all the garbage that you just presented us with, and really it was wonderful. I already pre-ordered your book while you were speaking. I'm so excited to read it.
Oh, and
Um,
don't forget, everybody can also order. Oh, I just closed my.
no, you got it. It's still
I'm
up
a
there.
good writer, but a terrible computer user. Um, a lot of the topics that I talked about today are in this book, which you can order and read today, you
Oh,
know.
excellent. Yeah, Image Control. Yeah, I ordered your novel. I'm excited about
Awesome.
that. So I'll order this one too. And again, I know that folks need to get the heck out of here. We've already lost a bunch of people, but in spite of all of the really dim, terrible, fascist kind of things that are happening in our world, what is something that gives you hope?
What is something that gives me hope? Well, again, want to stress the community aspect of it. Uh, I just noticed too a comment here that social media, Zoom, etc., is vital for people with mobility issues, and I do want to say that again. I wish that the technology that we have was in better hands. And because I do think like there are so many amazing technologies that come into being, that come along, whatever, and they very quickly get subverted into some of the worst things ever. I think it was amazing that a lot of people with disabilities were able to attend bookstore events for the first time because, you know, they were suddenly all on Zoom. Um, I think that's another aspect of the pandemic that we can learn from rather than toss into the past. Um, but yeah, what gives me hope? I think uh, I think the way that people are reacting to a lot of the things that they're being sold is the thing that gives me hope the most. Basically, ever since 2016 and then 2020, the the way that a lot of these topics, you know, police brutality, uh, religious extremism in government, um, uh, Palestine, are being discussed by large numbers of people have changed. Um, and I think that a lot of this is, again, a collapse of credibility. We don't accord institutions with the same credibility that we once gave them. And I think that is a good thing. I think it's a scary thing, but I think it's a good thing. Um, People question authority much more now than they did before,
Yeah.
especially when authority is a big orange bloated bigot, you know. I think that probably helped a lot.
They're not necessarily orange or bloated here in our state legislature, but boy, are they bigots. So, my hope, I guess, is by poking fun of it all. I was in a meeting this morning with the reproductive justice group of us who get together and talk about what's happening in these terrible bills that are going through. And, like we just have to sometimes sit back and laugh at how ridiculous, people like Senator Jake Hoffman or Anthony Kern are when they try to, legislate morals or morality
Right,
in the name of their exclusionary, abusive God. But
right.
that's, yeah. Anyway, this has been really, really good, a little bit depressing, definitely sobering, but wonderful. And now I'm about to order the other book. So, and I encourage everybody else to do the same thing. So I just want to say thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us today. I feel so lucky to have been able to hear this, and I'm really looking forward to reading both your books.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you had me. And thank you, everybody who took time out of their day to sit and listen to me.
Awesome. Well, I bet you there's going to be a whole bunch of people who are going to be reading your book. So thank you so much. I enjoyed, I know, fingers crossed. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye, everybody.